Should be good. Good to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
You want to start, Jocelyn, or would you like me to start?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our presentation today on analyzing Power BI performance. My name is Jocelyn Porter. I'm a data engineer at 3Cloud Solutions, and I have worked for the past 5 years to make sure that your data models in Power BI are the most opportune as they can be and that they're fully optimized. And I'm very passionate about making sure that you have working models that serve all your purposes and needs. So welcome.
I put my name phonetically on there because it's pretty hard to pronounce. I'm Dan Szepesi. I work on the same team as Jocelyn. We're in the managed data group. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to a slide on it. But my background has been all over the place. Originally, I was in managed hosting way back in the day, kind of that's pre-cloud cloud, and then so I was doing a lot of server stuff, IIS, went into SharePoint for a while, and then ended up into Microsoft BI space, adding more and more data engineering, but Power BI performance is still kind of like the thing I really like to do. So I think I presented, I don't remember when it was, I was here and presented on Power BI performance on something, but I don't remember what it was. I won't hold you guys to remembering it either, but
Yeah, I don't remember either, but I
I think it
do.
was on, it might have been like compression or something. I think we
Yeah.
probably should have done this one first and then that one later. But so
That's all
let me
right. We're
talk.
here now.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about 3Cloud, just the obligatory company slides. 3Cloud, you may have heard of them. They grew by absorbing a bunch of other companies. So Jocelyn and I both used to work at Blue Granite. Blue Granite was purchased by 3Cloud. 3Cloud purchased several other BI and Azure support companies or consulting companies. So we are a consulting firm. We're 100% focused on Azure. Occasionally some other stuff slips in, but we really try to stay focused on that. Very tied closely to Microsoft, and you can see the various awards that we've won as far as Partner of the Year, that kind of stuff. Next. So I did mention that we're both on a team called Managed Data. So we're in Managed Services and we're the Managed Data team. And so what we do is a little bit more support lifecycle governance, optimization, that kind of thing. The main 3Cloud business model is like a lot of other consulting companies, is the project teams, and they come in and deploy and implement and then roll out. Whereas in managed data, we try to form a relationship with the customer, understand the business, and basically sign long-term contracts to help support, optimize, develop that kind of stuff. So I really like it, that kind of stuff, because it gives me a chance to work with businesses and kind of understand what they're trying to do long term and help kind of give vision, uh, enough break fix stuff to keep my squirrel brain happy. But then long term vision and planning is a big part of it too. So if you have any questions about that or are interested in that for your company, let either Jocelyn or I know.
Alrighty, and that kind of brings us to our agenda for today. So our plan for today is to start out with a little bit of a background on Power BI, a little bit more about its architecture and how it came to be and its history. Then we'll go more into a demo heavy set so that we can show you a little bit more about how you can monitor performance when you have slow visuals, slow model refreshes, or some capacity issues. And then sprinkled in between those demos, we'll cover a little bit more about import model refresh and Power BI and Fabric capacities. Now, without further ado, we're going to start out with a little bit of Power BI architecture. So I know you all are probably very familiar with Power BI and its architecture, but for the sake of this demonstration, we'll just do a quick little overview. So as you know, Power BI is a collection of software services, apps, and connectors that work together to turn your data sources into interactive insights. Whether your data is in an Excel spreadsheet or a collection of cloud-based and on-premises data warehouses, Power BI lets you connect to those data sources, bring that in, transform it, and turn them into pretty visuals. Now, Power BI consists of three main parts. The first being Power BI Desktop, which is a Windows application that allows you to physically connect to data and create that data model. And then next up is Power BI Service, is where you publish your data model, and then you can share that with the rest of your company. And then lastly is Power BI Mobile, so you can take your pretty reports on the go. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on Power BI Desktop, because that is the majority of where the modeling takes place and where the bulk of a lot of capacity and performance issues begin. So digging a little bit further into what Power BI Desktop is, Power BI Desktop has many capabilities, but the three main drivers of the platform are the ETL process, which is extracting, transforming, and loading data using Power Query and data connectors, as well as data modeling. And the data modeling is the creating relationships or forming relationships between the dimension tables that you have to their fact tables that you also have. And it's using this full SSAS tabular engine, which we are going to dive into a little bit deeper into further down the road in this presentation. And then lastly is presenting or visualizing your data into that actionable insights, really creating a story for your data. Now, as I mentioned prior, the main source or the main bulk of a lot of performance issues comes from data modeling and having a really performant data model. But all three of these are very important in creating that performant overall end result. So if you have a data model that is not as performant as you'd like it to be, then it can affect your visuals down the road, or affect refreshes, or even capacity down the road. So it's important to have that core data modeling aspect fully optimized. So let's take a look into what makes that data modeling or SSAS tabular engine a little bit more of that powerhouse behind Power BI. So as I mentioned before, the core engine of Power BI is the SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular engine. So what is this? It sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo, right? But essentially what this SSAS Tabular is a data engine, aka Vertipack, that allows you to create semantic data models for business intelligence, data analysis, and reporting tools like Fabric or Power BI, Excel, and reporting services. So essentially what Power BI does is it takes this core engine and then wraps that ETL process and the visualization around that engine. So basically takes that as the base and then adds these additional resources so you can get the full picture of connecting to data to creating beautiful reports. So how does this work in Power BI? Essentially, you take that data and in Power BI Desktop, you make that connection to your data so you can pull it in and you can create semantic models. Create semantic models using those relationships between dimension and fact tables. Then once you have a fully functional semantic model, then you can publish it to Power BI Service. And then after you share it with a bunch of your team members at your company, you can create additional reports on top of those data models. Oh, sorry. And then you can share those actionable insights across your domain. Now, if you guys are a little bit more visual, like I am, we have a screenshot from one of our friends over at SQL BI showing a little bit more about the analysis services architecture. And just to give you all a precursor, we did ask for their permission to use this screenshot, and they were extremely happy to allow us to do so. Dan, do you want to speak a little bit more to this slide and what this screenshot represents?
It's always funny because I'm a consultant, so technically I shouldn't be talking about another consulting firm, but the reality of the situation is the first time when I interviewed at Blue Granite, I failed miserably, even to the point, like I was at that Power BI point where I didn't even really know context, filter context, row context kind of stuff. So I hit a brick wall. suddenly realized I didn't know what I was talking about. So I dove into SQL BI's content. I bought their videos, I bought their books, I absorbed all of it. These really are the guys. Some people call them the Italians because they're both Italian and have outrageous Italian accents, Marco and Alberto. Um, they're the ones that really are the definitive source for me, even beyond the Learn documentation that's out there from Microsoft. A lot of this content specifically is in the Mastering Tabular video course. There's a Mastering DAX, there's Optimizing DAX, and then I don't know, this is probably going to show up backwards, and that's going to fade into my background. Look at that, I just disappeared. All right, that's so I do want to say they have a book out now called Optimizing DAX. It's a second edition. It is 800 pages. I'm only 80 pages in, but I think they do a really good job of kind of starting out easy and then getting really into the difficulty. If you are interested in Power BI performance, you need to get this book. You need to check out their video. I just like the architecture because it really showed, that front end. We were goofing around beforehand talking about or geezing about Power Pivot. And Donna was saying that's where all his stuff came from, was Power Pivot. But it really kind of shows that, that semantic model living in the middle and all these various pieces that tie into that now to render the data in whichever kind of view that you want it. And then the data that lives on the back end that's pulled into the semantic model to build that stuff, right? That middle core, multi-dimensional, MDX was the language, rollup, molap. I had just started learning that when Power BI exploded. So I really don't even know that well. All of my life, so to speak, in BI has been on the tabular side of that, the right side there, where it's a tabular model. The core language is DAX, and then you have Vertipack and Direct Query. But always just like to point everybody to SQLBI.com because I don't want to pretend like I figured this stuff out. I went and learned from them. So there you go, Jocelyn.
Awesome.
Back to you.
Thank you, Dan. So now that we know a little bit more about, the aspects that go into Power BI and that make up Power BI, I'll give a short history lesson on how it came to be. And I'm sure all of you know, but in case you didn't, Power BI began its origins in Excel, actually. So in 2010, Power Pivot was introduced, which was an Excel add-in that allowed users to begin working with and modeling large data sets for analysis. And essentially, this was the very first instance of that Analysis Services Tabular functionality there. And then a year later, Power View was introduced in 2011. It allowed users to create interactive charts, graphs, maps, and other visuals inside Excel and SQL Server reporting services. So then you have that more visual aspect coming into fruition within Excel. And then in 2013 came the introduction of Power Query, which allowed analysts to connect to different data sources and then allowed them to clean and transform that data and then load it into Excel or Power Pivot to fully get that experience. So now you can see that we have those three main aspects of Power BI coming to fruition within Excel. You have the modeling aspect of Power Pivot, and then you have the visualization aspect, which comes from Power View, and then the data connection aspect that comes from Power Query. Then in 2014, Power BI was introduced first only as a web-based interface, and then shortly after, Power BI Desktop was released pretty much as a culmination of the three steps beforehand. So you can see where Power BI first got that engine developed and then wraps that ETL process and visualization process around it. All right. So then that takes us to our first demo. And leading into that, coming from the history of Power BI, we see that this engine is creating the bulk of that performance within your model. But what happens if you get to the end of your report making and you realize that you really don't have a lot of performant visuals within your report? What happens if you navigate to a page and it takes way too long for a specific visual to load? Well, we can take a look into how to analyze that with this scenario 1 demo, and I have that pulled up. I'll take over that this time. So here we are in Power BI Desktop, and as you can see here, I have 2 pages, page 1 that doesn't have any visuals in it, and page 2, which has a purposefully slow demo or slow visual. And what we can do here is to start this logging process. What we'll want to do is go to View and initialize the Performance Analyzer. I'll have to click on it twice to get it to pop up. And then I'm going to hit Start Recording. And what this does is basically logs everything that you, or every action that you take within your Power BI report. So any visual that you interact with or any tab that you switch within your Power BI report, this will track that and let you know the load times that it takes. So if I navigate to the slow visual page, and that kind of loaded pretty fast. So let's see.
It's still loading up there. It's got the little caterpillars right above the
Oh,
E.
good. Yep, you can see the little ants marching in a circle.
Caterpillar, right? Ants marching. That's what it is.
So you'll see that this is loading in milliseconds over here. So this will tell you exactly how long it took for this visual to load, and it's taking quite some time. You can see that it took about 24 seconds for that visual to load, which is a very long time. So if I expand this here, it shows you the back end of everything that was going on behind this visual. So you can see the DAX query that was generated for this specific visual, visual display, how long it took to actually show the visual. And then this other section, this typically comes from having multiple visuals on the page. Typically, each visual needs to wait for the others to load, for it to fully load. So more often than not, if you have a long other column here, it's indicative of having way too many visuals on the page. And we don't typically like to advise our clients to have a lot of visuals on the page, which unfortunately is a pretty common problem. But I digress. So from here, which is very interesting, is what you used to be able to do is just copy the query and then go directly into DAX editor. But what's new is you can run this DAX query in the, or run the query in the DAX query view. So just taking a quick look at that. I know this is tiny, so let's see if we can make this bigger. It shows you that DAX code that is generated for that specific visual, which is really cool. And a couple things that I want to point out here is that when Power BI generates these DAX queries, it creates these variables that are pretty generic so that most functions can happen within Power BI. And then the second one I want to point out is this top end function. So typically, when you have a visual and it loads, it typically grabs the first 500 rows. So when you scroll down and you see the little scale thing pop up, it's usually grabbing 500 more rows at a time. So this can be a performance hit as we can see when we go on. So the DAX query view is pretty cool. You can see the results of the DAX code that you copied here. But to get a little bit more insight as to what's exactly going on besides just the DAX code, we're going to go back to the report, and I'm going to go over here and copy the query. So that copies that query that we saw in the DAX editor. And then we're going to navigate to external tools, and then we're going to go pop into DAX Studio, and hopefully that'll pop up in the right screen.
Never pops up on the right screen.
It never does. But essentially what this does is it connects DAX Studio to that instance that's being run in Power BI. So as you can see here, you can see it's connected to that local host 59263, which is that specific instance that Power BI is running on. All right, so now that we have DAX Studio up, what we're going to want to do first is we're going to want to turn on server timing so we can log exactly how long it takes to run that DAX code. You can turn on the query plan. I'm not quite sure if I'll go into that quite as much today. But one thing we also want to make sure to do is this clear on run. That'll clear the cache so that we can see exactly what's being taken place without any extra mumbo jumbo going on. So from here, you can see that the query trace has started, so that's all turned on. I'm going to paste that DAX code that we had copied from before, and then we're going to go ahead and click run. So you can see here that the query has started and that cache that I previously had on there was cleared from that clear on run. So this will take some time. I know our visual took about 24 seconds to load before. Oh, it's actually pretty quick. I take that back. So you can see here that the 502 rows were returned. So it looks like it's successful there. And from here, we can click on server timings. And I know this is pretty small. So let me see if I can make this bigger. All right, that might be too big. All right. So from the server timings page, we can see that each one of these rows is indicative of a process that was taken to execute the DAX query above. So from here, you can also see the formula engine and the storage engine here. Now, one major thing that I like to point out is that we would typically like to see that the majority of the processes that are being taken is within that storage engine. Now, you can see we are not successful at that here, but that's mainly because we wanted to create an example that is just non-performant. So this is for our demo purposes only, but more often than not, we'd like to see more blue than orange in this case. And then let's see. So if we click on a specific row, we'll see is it XM SQL?
Yep.
Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. This is XM SQL. It's pretty easy to understand if you're familiar with SQL. You'll see exactly the process that was being taken to execute that line. Now, if we scroll down here, you'll see a couple of these bolded rows. And what that means is it contains a callback. And what a callback is essentially saying that the storage engine cannot or doesn't have enough power to compute that formula. So it hands it off to the formula engine to take care of. And what the formula engine is really good at doing is performing these more complex calculations. However, it is single-threaded, so only one calculation can be done at a time. And so that is really what's taking the large majority of the performance hit there is that kind of communication back and forth between the storage engine and the formula engine saying, hey, we need you to compute this large calculation for me and getting that done. So that is pretty much what I wanted to point out for our first demo. Dan, is there anything else that I may have missed while I'm going through here?
Yeah, I mean,
that
it's
you
not
would like to
missed, just a little more color to it. So and I do remember talking about this in that other presentation. So it must have been my optimization presentation where I was talking about compression and formula engine, storage engine. The breakdown there is actually pretty telling, right? So the formula engine only has a single thread that it can operate on at a single time, but it's really the brains of the business, right? That all of the complex logic, the translation of DAX to storage engine queries, that's all done inside the formula engine. Now, typically you have a lot of storage engines available, they are multi-threaded. That whole storage engine process is multi-threaded, right? So in the best of cases, the formula engine takes the query, breaks it into pieces, and hands it off to a bunch of threads in the storage engine, and the storage engine goes, retrieves the data, sends it back to the formula engine, and it's done, right? In this
The
case,
storage engine can read compressed data, right?
yes,
Dan?
yes, great point. The storage engine, the reason it's really fast, it's really dumb. It doesn't have a very large set of verbs that it can work with. It's pretty much joins and some aggregations. But the storage engine can read compressed data. The formula engine can't. So you can imagine if the storage engine needs to pass something back to the formula engine, it has to uncompress it and hand it back to the formula engine. So there's all sorts of inefficiency there if they have to talk back and forth. And that's what Jocelyn was pointing out. When you see those bold entries in that query there, right away, that's something that you can start to look at for optimization. You know, what am I trying to call there? What am I doing? Is there a way to simplify this? I don't remember what I did. I did something where I just really pummeled it to make sure it was formula engine only. And that's why it's so slow. The other thing I was going to show, I literally just did this an hour ago. I was kind of curious. One other option I found, if you go up to all queries, can you click on that, Jocelyn?
Sure.
So what all queries does is it kind of puts, they used to call it in Network Analyzer, there was a promiscuous mode, which basically meant it was just sitting there listening to everything. When you hit all queries, it's now going to trace anything that happens in Power BI Desktop, because remember, we're connected to Power BI Desktop. So when you have all queries running, you can flip over to Power BI Desktop and click a visual or scroll down or something like that, and you will see the queries pop up in that window down there. I don't know if it ever came back or not, but you'd have to scroll like down 500 to see the next 500 go or something like that.
It
Yeah,
might have
so
already
let's,
loaded.
yeah. But you can see there that it's actually literally capturing those queries that are going on Power BI Desktop. Every time I fuss with this thing, it's more stuff pops out of it. So go ahead and turn off all queries so that doesn't drive you nuts later.
Thank you.
But the query plan stuff, it's funny because I was just reading, I told you 800-page book. I kind of went in thinking I was going to come out of it understanding query plans. The guys that wrote the book, they punted on query plans. They're like, yes, they're there. Trying to understand them is really not worth the effort it requires. Your larger queries, the query plans are going to be enormous, like page and page and page worth of stuff. You can see in that top physical query plan, you'd have to really scroll down there to capture it. So, and this was a very simple, just one visual type thing. So, I don't know. It'd be neat if somebody could figure out, but if the guys that literally one of those two guys was on the product team and they're punting on it, I'm going to punt on it too. So I think
Then
that's good. I
will
think you
too.
hit everything. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Dan. Appreciate it. All righty. So now that takes us to, let me get my bearings back. All right. So then this kind of takes us to our second portion of our 3-portion demo. So we've hit visual refresh errors. Now we're going to go focus more on data model refresh, and if it's very slow, kind of taking a look more at what's going on in the back end when we have an import mode and what happens during those refreshes there.
Okay, so you kind of just hit on, there's a question in the queue of saying, did you use import mode or direct query in this example?
Yep.
Gonna go right there. Perfect
Import
timing.
mode. Perfect. So moving on to the storage modes, we're just going to have a high-level overview of 2 of them. I know dual storage mode is a thing, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we're just going to focus on import mode versus direct query. And just to know that dual storage mode does use Vertipack, but for this instance, we're going to be focusing on import mode solely. So import mode is solely based on that Vertipack engine. where data is stored in memory as a snapshot, and it's also compressed. Data can be refreshed periodically to bring in new data. So when we mean this, we mean that when it is published to Power BI Desktop, it's not continuously getting that new data. So in order to get a new set of data, you're going to need to do a full Power BI refresh, either locally on your desktop or within Power BI service to get that new data. And another thing to note is just kind of a fun fact. It is the most frequently used storage mode in Power BI, probably in my opinion, because it's the most easy to use. And then just as a comparison to direct query mode, initially no data is loaded into your model. This is where Power BI Desktop sends queries directly to the underlying data source. So if you want data right then and there, you can get it on demand. Data is retrieved from the data source at the time of that query. So when you're in Power BI service and you want new data, you can just go in and get it. And then the difference between this and import mode is that data resides in its original source before, during, and after query execution. So there's no copying of data. There's no creating a snapshot of the data like there is in import mode. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out about import mode is that in order to create this storage, initially Vertipack has to break down the data into columns, and then it compresses the columns within each of those, and then it indexes them. And then from there, what Vertipack does is establishes relationships between the columns and computes any other calculations, such as calculated columns or calculated tables from there. So it's very compressed data. And moving on for a little bit more detail in import mode, which is what we're going to be focusing on here, is how it refreshes and gets that new data. So a little bit more about what's happening behind the scenes when Power BI does a refresh with this import mode. First, an import semantic model is published to the service and a refresh is kicked off. So you've originally created that semantic model. It's nice, pristine, only has that star schema that looks great. You're happy with it. So you go ahead and publish it to Power BI service, and then you kick off a refresh. Next, what Power BI does, which you don't necessarily get to see, is that it creates a copy of that model, and then which includes that new data. So what we don't necessarily know, or what we don't necessarily see, is that this doubles the memory footprint during the refresh. So if you can visualize it, there's almost going to be a spike during that time because you have a duplicate of that data plus some. And then finally, Power BI switches to use the new model. So then you have all this fresh, new, sparkly data. So why did we mention this? It's kind of to highlight that there are processes that take place during a Power BI refresh that we don't necessarily have insight to. So if we are noticing a very slow Power BI refresh, what can we do to pinpoint exactly what's going on there? And then I'll hand it off to Dan for the scenario number 2.
I'm going to try to address that question too, and also talk about that very last point you made before we hop into the demo. So first of all, the question was asking if we did import or direct query in that example. And I think the question behind that was, would it work for direct query or live connection? And yes, it still should. The performance analyzer will pick up the DAX that you're running in the visual. You can do it the same way. You can't connect with DAX Studio to a thin, like a live connection PBIX, but you can use that query view inside of Power BI Desktop. So that's pretty cool. The difference with a live connection or direct query is what it's being translated to and sent to the server. Direct query, it's getting translated to SQL. Live view, it's going through DAX, but that still works. I'm going to share out very briefly, because I don't want to derail this, but it made me think of it when you mentioned it. So I was just reading this from Chris Webb, who's the ultimate Power BI geek. works at Microsoft now. I found this really interesting. So this is what Jocelyn just said, right? When you run a full refresh on a semantic model, it keeps that current model, creates a new one, so it's doubling the memory, and then it will switch. There's actually ways to do it where you can actually clear it first. So if you had an enormous data set and it's the middle of the night and you're like, man, I don't want to wait, I don't want to kill my capacity because I'm gonna double the space, you can actually set this value to have it clear first. So it basically like dumps the current model and then just starts from scratch, right? So you only have half the memory usage. That's fine as long as nobody's trying to actually look at your visuals at that point. But he also talks in here about using semantic model scale out, which is a premium capacity setting where it actually takes images of you have like a read-only image and then a read-write image, and it will scale it out based on how many people are accessing it. And this article has a neat way of using that to take it on the one of the images to clear it. The other images will still be serving out content, but you will clear that one image, refresh it, and then come back up, and it hasn't hit your capacity on the double. A little complex of a topic, but I just wanted to introduce it so that when I throw it in the chat, you can go back and look at that. Hopefully that went through. Okay, cool. All right, so shifting gears, well, not really shifting gears, it's all the same thing. Let's talk about that slow refresh. So we're talking import mode, and we've got a big data set. We hit refresh and we go off and get coffee. We go for a walk. We go wandering around the neighborhood, and it's still just sitting there doing stuff. You want to get a sense of what's happening while we're doing that. So let me pull this up here. I'm going to close down DAX Studio. Remember, if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, remember back to when Jocelyn was talking about the history and where this stuff came from. The inside of Power BI Desktop, when you launch Power BI Desktop, you have a full instance of SQL Server Analysis Server running on your laptop. And because of that, we can then interact with that engine the same as if we were troubleshooting performance on an analysis services queue or something like that, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use SQL Profiler. But before I do that, I'm going to pop open DAX Studio. Again, I have it linked in the external tools, and I'm going to get that port that it's running on, 52475. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to open up SQL Profiler, which I'm opening on my other screen there, and it just went away. Thank you. Where did it go?
And Dan,
There
it's
it is.
okay that you and I have different ports since we're running different instances, correct?
Yes. In fact, that's just a random number that comes up. Every time you start Power BI Desktop, it'll be a different port because it's randomly picking a port to launch that on.
Yeah.
Good call out there. So I have SQL Profiler open, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new trace. And
Dan, before we dive into this, could you give a 10-second brief overview of what SQL Profiler is and where to get it?
Sure. I usually launch it. So when you install SQL tools, so if you're using SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, it's usually partnered with that. If you have that on your laptop, I typically just launch it this way. I just type SQL, and you can see that SQL Profiler is here, this application. This is basically going to let us attach to the process and trace all the events that are occurring while we're doing our refresh. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a Power BI template that Phil Seamark created to actually throw it into Power BI and get a visualization of how long the various parts of the refresh took. So I have Profiler open here, and I'm going to start a new trace. It is going to be Analysis Services. It will probably come up to Database Engine as default if you've never done this before. Now, if you notice, I have a big crazy URL in here. I can actually, if the data set's living in a premium capacity, I can actually connect to that XMLA endpoint with this tool and trace it in the service when it's refreshing. I'm not going to do that here, and I'm going to hit the wrong button pretend like I meant to do that. There we go. I'm gonna clear this out. So I'm gonna go 52457. Hopefully got that right. So I'm attaching to localhost, my laptop, on this port to connect to that instance. And I better grab the wrong one. Let's try that again. 52475. Well, I was close. 52475. Oh, that's great. Fantastic. Let's see what's going on here. It's going to be a short demo. Let's go. Oh, there we go. I needed to do Windows authentication because I'm running locally. So this is going to pop up here. Here's the recommendation I'm going to give. You can spend hours fussing and playing around with all these events here. I'm going to do what Phil Seymour talks about in his blog. I'll give you the link to it. We're going to go to a blank template because we're only going to pick a couple of events that we want to capture. So we're going to have this thing capture every time a command is done, this command end. We're going to do job graph events, and this is probably the most important one for the template that Phil Seymour has there. And then we're going to do progress report end, right? You can do begin and end, so you can see in the data. I think this is probably the skinny down, the best way to do it. Now, when I hit run, I have now launched SQL Profiler and attached to my Power BI desktop instance. And I can come over to here and just hit refresh. And now, as it's doing its thing here, I don't have anything yet, but this is where it'll start to show up as this refresh starts to kick off, right? We've kind of got this evaluating where it's churning away before it starts. Now, as we flip to other queries, there we go. We can see this command end, right? So this meant a command run, and then this was the end of it. Here's some of our job graph stuff that's going through here. Very quickly, you will start to see this fly by. I don't know if you were quick enough to see. There was some Power Query in one of that. But I'm going to just leave this and let it run. Oh, it's a quick refresh, so it's already done. When I am done, I'm going to come up here and, again, for this demo, I'm going to save it as a trace XML file. All right, and I probably have like 5 copies of this. Yep. So let's do refresh. And because of my fantastic imagination, we're going to call this refresh 4. And I'm going to do that. All right, now, I said that you could, if you wanted to, go through each one of these things and kind of poke around and see. And you can actually start to see it as far as, it's bringing data in. It talks about how long it takes to load those particular tables, but then you process each one of them and you can see it going through its steps of the compression, like as it's compressing, each segment of these tables. All super exciting stuff. This is the Analyze My Refresh. He actually should be a PBIT in there. There it is, PBIAS engine. Let's open up. This PBIT is what you'll get if you go to that blog. That I'll throw that link in there. And of course, open on the other window. PBIT template file. So there's no data associated with it. It's going to pop up and ask me for something. What it's going to ask is this path here. And it went on my other screen. Any questions so far on the trace? Let me stop there and give some space. We are still loading. I can't get it to shift to the other side. Hang on a second. Let me do this again. Maybe I'll just
Never
open up
wants
this.
to open on the right screen.
it opened on the wrong screen, and then since it's stuck at a prompt asking me for that, I couldn't switch it over. So let's just open up the PBIX, and I'll show how the parameters set to get the file. So basically, when I save it as this XML format, in Phil's Power Query in this template, it opens up and rips through it and builds out a visual. Yep, on the other window again. Give me 1 second. There we go. Nope. Come on. I probably have too much stuff open. Okay, this is the actual PBIX. This is not the data we're looking at right now. This is from the last time it ran. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and edit parameters. And I'm going to throw this in here. And it's refresh 4.xml. We'll see if I got that right. And then I'm going to refresh this. And it's going to load it. And you see, we can see from this visual what this looks like. You know, this is each one of these tables, how long it was in this execute SQL versus process. The reason why I was looking at it for my customer, all you could see was the process side of stuff because their tables are so huge that the thing would just sit there forever trying to compress it. But basically what this does is give you a really visual breakdown of how long all of this took to process, right? And this is 7 seconds, 3 seconds, gives you an overall, it took 12 seconds to do a refresh, 19K is CPU time. Where this is useful is if you have one of those really long refreshes, if you can get the trace for the whole thing and then come in here, often you'll find it's just one table that's really taking forever. And maybe it's a slow endpoint, right? Or maybe it's a table that it's just taking forever to compress, or there's just something weird about this table. I really like this template because it just gives you that quick visual. You know, you can start to get into all the nerdery about like how many rows per second and all that kind of stuff. But that is how to analyze the refresh with SQL Profiler. Let me think for a second. Did I miss anything on that? Again, remember that if I want to go, do I have it? Yeah, so if I go to a workspace and I go into, if it is a premium workspace or a PPU, there is this connection string. And instead of connecting to local host on the port, I can use this connection string and actually, like I said, do a profiler trace on that actual refresh occurring in the service. Jocelyn, am I missing anything?
I was going to ask if you could send the link to that Power BI report or where we could find that.
Yes, yes, I will do that. All right.
Other than that, I think you're good.
Okay, you want to go to the next section
Alrighty.
while I dig that up?
Yeah, it's a pretty short section, but just to
I'll
give a
type
little bit of
quickly.
a breather to Dan. So next in lastly in our 3-part series of demos, we'll kind of tackle more of capacity spikes and what to do if you're seeing capacity issues arise from your models. So what I'll cover is a little bit of background behind capacities, what they are and what to expect. So just breaking down Power BI and Fabric capacities to this extent, we have the shared capacity, which is the default mode for you to publish content. Power BI Pro license is required to share the content. Next up, you can opt for a Power BI Premium license, which gives you a little bit more Power BI capabilities, including bigger model sizes and more refreshes per day. And then we also have a new Fabric capacity section here, which shows you that you can provide, which provides you computing power to meet customer demand and can be upgraded with additional SKUs. So if you're seeing capacity spikes within your tenant, you want to opt for Fabric capacity, you can always opt for higher SKUs. And I'm sure that this group knows probably the most about Fabric capacities in any given context, but figured we'd cover that content here anyway. Another thing to note for Fabric capacities is that it allows for bursting and smoothing if/when you consume extra compute resources beyond what has been purchased. So if you find yourself going above and beyond all of the compute power that you have purchased, Fabric has the capacity to smooth out your resources. And of course, it is an additional cost. But that kind of leads us into our next topic, which is why care about your capacity in general. Essentially, A poor performing Power BI report can affect your entire capacity or tenant, which, as you can probably see, will incur additional costs. So not only does it take a lot of time for refreshes to occur, but it is insanely costly for your tenant and company should you have those capacity spikes. And then a couple points to make here. The Fabric Capacity app can be used to see which reports are consuming a lot of capacity. You can see this within the Power BI service and have this set up. But this is a pretty high level overview of the capacity spikes or capacity activities that are taking place within your tenant. So what we can do outside of the Fabric Capacity app is take a look at Azure Log Analytics, because it breaks it down into a little bit more of a detailed action by action line item that's happening within your tenant. All right. And that leads us to scenario 3 demo. Dan, are you ready? Was
Yes.
that enough of a break?
Absolutely.
All right.
So this scenario is it's relatively simple using the approaches we've shown to, if you have Power BI desktop, somebody says, I've got this slow visual. It's in dev right now. You know, here's the PBIX. Why is this visual so slow? Well, we just took you through how you can capture that in Performance Analyzer, how you can run in DAX Studio, how you can break it down. But the reality is, a lot of times you get a frantic call. Well, if you're in the business that Jocelyn and I are in, you'll get a frantic call from your customer that such and such report is going really slowly, and the CEO is trying to look at his iPhone from a yacht in the Mediterranean and very upset that the page is not loading. What do we do, right? So let's start talking about in the capacity. I don't have access to the PBIX, so I need to somehow troubleshoot this without having access to that, right? So we talked a little bit beforehand about this Microsoft Fabric Capacity Metrics app. If I would ask, I think lots of people can install it, but it's going to work the best if a tenant admin installs it and then gives access to people for it. I'm not going to go into how to do that. I will say that it says Fabric Capacity, and it'll say that even if you don't have any Fabric capacities. It's just Microsoft's propensity to make something new by giving it a new name, right? So when we go into this workspace here, you can see that there's this report for Fabric Capacity Metrics. We're going to fly over this because I don't know how much this is going to really solve other than just confirming like, oh yeah, you're screwed. The views that we're seeing here, typically my eye goes to this in the top right immediately, right? And this is going to have a breakdown of what your utilization is doing as, you know, opposed to this 100% CU. With Power BI premium capacities, you had the ability to have auto scaling so that if you used up all your capacity, it would give you another couple CUs and then you could burn through that and then it would come back down after a day. If you weren't paying attention, you could really generate some extra cost that way. If you didn't have auto scale on, you'd hit that 100% and you would just flatten out. When you have used up your capacity, you go into throttling, where Power BI is going to start to slow down some of the requests, and then you might flat out get into where things start to error out if you're way over capacity and it can't bleed it down. One thing that's really interesting about this view, it was really embarrassing. You know, you get a chance to talk to Microsoft, and like I just started complaining about how hard it was to navigate this, and it turned out I just didn't pay attention. So once you find your time slice, and typically you'll have big spikes here, but let's just look at this particular spike here. This is just showing background percentage. That's just from my refreshes. I'm going to click right there. That's probably about where I want to look at. This Explore lights up once you do that. And when you click Explore, it's the same as right-clicking and drilling into this page, but this gives you more detail about what was going on during that time slice, right? So this is a 30-second time slice. Don't get confused. There's going to be some things in here that start before and end after that slice, but they were running during this particular slice, and that's why they're there. This particular breakdown will show you background operations. That means capacities that are used for refresh. And then interactive operations, that's more towards your front-end report generation, all that kind of stuff. Really poor one to take a look at, but I couldn't really get a demo going on this. And I didn't want to show my customers' environment. So this is our 3 cloud one, and this is a particular capacity. But this would break down, during that time slice, what was using up a certain, the most percent of base capacity and all that kind of stuff. And then that would give you a particular workspace that you could go find and a data set to see who's drilling into that. But we're here to talk log analytics. Once you've kind of hit the end of this here, and again, it gives you a pretty decent idea what workspace, what data set, was it interactive or refresh that was causing problems? Remember that in Premium Capacity and Fabric, they're separated now. They're not all part of the same. You have a background capacity and an interactive capacity. Let's actually go into the workspace where I have this. So this is not showing me the right one. Hang on a moment. Let me go to here. Hopefully it's going to let me in. If we go to the workspace itself, we have the possibility now with premium capacity workspaces to set them up so that they will output their diagnostic information, their engine, what's going on in the engine, to Azure Log Analytics, right? So when you come down here, if you don't have it set up, it'll have a button to connect.
It needs to be attached to a premium workspace.
Right. This has to be a premium workspace where we're setting this onto. You can see that I picked a subscription and a resource group and a log analytics workspace. This is all needs to be created in the portal, in Azure portal, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But once I turn this on, all those engine events of everything that's occurring in the workspace are going to be dumped to this Azure Log Analytics workspace. So let's go there. Take a look at what we're getting dumped out. I'm going to go into my portal in Azure, and I'm going to look for those log analytic workspaces. I have it up here just in case it doesn't show up. There it is. So I'm always in there. That's why it shows up here. You could just search for log analytics, or you could go down to your recent, what have you. But there are links out there how to set this up. It's relatively simple how to set up a log analytics workspace. There is a charge for it. It's a storage charge. So you're going to get charged the more data you dump in there. But what log analytics is really just like an at-scale location to dump data to. So if you want to do custom applications, in this case, we want to do Power BI, we want to dump it there. You can have Azure Data Factory dump there. It's highly optimized for fast writes, basically.
And you can turn it on and off based on the needs that you have. So if
we do that with one of my customers. We go into the workspace. If we know we're going to start looking at a workspace, we'll go in there and turn it on, as she's saying, in the Power BI workspace, and have it start logging, and then we can look at it. Now, the downside of that is if something occurs before then, we don't catch it because it's only once we turn it on. But the upside is I'm not paying for a ton of information that I'm logging to this workspace. Once you're in here, go to logs, and if you do not see this kind of view at the top, there's a slider that says something about, I really should capture this. I think I say this every time. There's a slider up top that says show new view or what have you. I definitely recommend you turn that on. I closed that initial window because that's basically pulling up kind of pre-written queries, and they really don't have any for Power BI. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say select a table. And under log management, I'm going to see Power BI Datasets Workspace. And this is here because I turned it on in that workspace. And there's actually other workspaces that are logging here as well. Once we're inside of here, there's two ways to access the data. If you would like to learn another language, there's KQL, which, what is it? Azure Data Explorer, I think, uses as well. I'm a big fan of the simple mode because it reminds me of poking around in the data view in Power BI desktop. And you can see, if you remember from SQL Profiler, we had that progress report begin and progress report end, whether they're showing up again. If I expand this, here's all the information. And this is actually, if we look at the time, 8/6, that's probably UTN, that's UTC. I don't know if it has local time, but this is actually what was being logged in Log Analytics when I did that refresh. And here's a couple queries that I did when I was refreshing that page. And you can see the information that you start to get. You get tenant ID, time it was generated, here's workspace, capacity. You get down into, here's your artifact. That was a query. The data set is import. It took 12 seconds for this query to run, right? So 12,220 milliseconds. This clown did it. It's a DAX query. And then look at that. Look at that, right? So very quickly, if I'm trying to figure out what's going on into the capacity, once I have it down to a data set or a workspace, I can go into that workspace and tell it to start sending data to Log Analytics. And then within 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, it'll start showing up here. There's just a lag. It doesn't instantly show up. It catches it instantly. It just won't show up instantly. I can start looking at, and I could come in here and say, well, all right, we've got millions of rows of data here. Let's make this easier on ourselves. Let's grab the one that used the most CPU, for instance, right? Or that lasted the longest. Notice I'm just clicking up here. And then once I figure out, all right, that's this certified monthly hours data set, well, I could come in here and turn off these other ones. But actually it was AdventureWorks 2019, right? That was the one that was really, and then there we go. I've filtered it down. So there's those particular queries that ran. So this is very cool. I will say, when I was complaining about the Fabric Capacity app and they told me I didn't know how to use it, part of what that whole discussion was about was that support and I guess the product team people that are building out some of this analytics stuff, they are using more and more of Log Analytics. So it is good to get familiar with the concept and how to do it. Again, I just think it's pretty neat that what you can't get down, and I tried. If I can ever figure it out, I'll blog about it or something, but I don't know what visual this is. I don't know what page it is, but I at least have code here that I can start to narrow in. Okay, they're doing something with fact internet sales. There's doing a top end of grand total, but I could start to see what's going on in that. There's still work to do in a sense that it's giving me a GUID for the workspace, right? So I've got to figure out which workspace that is and which data set based on the GUID and everything. Let me see if there was anything else in here. I think that was it. It's claims identity, if you're ever troubleshooting claims type stuff. But so to kind of recap what we've shown here is once you go in and you have your workspace, this is done at the workspace level, it has the diamond. Pretty sure PPU works as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. You can turn on sending all of that information to Log Analytics. If you want to just turn it on and let it run, you're charged on gigs of storage saved. It's really not that expensive, but maybe if you left it on for a couple of years, a couple months, it might be. But once this is turned on, all of the engine events that are occurring inside of this workspace, so your refreshes and your people viewing reports will start getting logged to this log analyzer workspace, and you can go in and start to look at it, drill through it, and then, like I said, if you're fancy, you can go out and find example queries that people have written to drill in and look for particular things. You could do it in KQL here instead of the simple mode. So that is that. I think that's the extent of it. We went over a little bit. Jocelyn, do we have anything else to cover?
Just questions. We have a
questions.
slide
Yeah,
for
let's do that.
questions.
All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
I could follow on real quick on that, because at least on the regular query ends that you can get with analysis services, there's a new thing called application context in there, which would
Yes.
give you a JSON with like the visual ID if it was a Power BI request and something else. And I don't know if it's in here, but that's been very useful to try to, get it down to that visual.
Pinpoint the
But-
visual.
But how do you align? That's right where I got to and failed. How do you align that visual ID with what's on that page? You can't get that out of the API, I don't think. Like there's nothing in the
I don't
API
know,
that gives me.
there was a new thing in the semantic link thing a week or so ago where it gave you a quick tool to put in the visual ID and get the proper name back. I mean, still not perfect, but for maybe a onesie, twosie thing might work.
I thought the
No,
semantic
it's
link
funny
went
'cause-
against the model about the semantic data set, not the report. Because the visual ID would be in the report. I was
Right.
starting to wonder if maybe we could get that from the new PPIR.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I bet you could. I think, again, Chris Webb has something
It's-
up there about you can actually use the developer. There's that whole developer sandbox that you can do for embedded. You can actually do something where you go into there and you can get the IDs out of
Yeah,
there.
you might be able to find it there. There's been a lot of people trying to look for that for a number of years and trying to make that last connection. To find out what visual that query that you showed comes from and all of those other type of things. So, there's definitely more to come. Semantic link is going to solve part of it. Maybe other stuff does, but I haven't looked at it lately and I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it, but good stuff. Anybody else have questions? Want to come off mute? Stump the chomp?
Why I like this group because you narrowed right in on where I didn't know any further. That application context, getting that report ID, and it was sad because I got there and I was like, yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And then it was, what the hell do I do with this? I can't get it out of the API. I just have a random GUID. I mean, I could sound smart and go, well, yes, this is the visual ID. That doesn't line it up, So yeah, I think it's in XML. It's not XML properties. I don't know why I don't have a good one here that's got that application context, but yeah, you'll see it logged in there. Anyway, any more questions?
Nothing that we're
Questions.
seeing. Ming just commented great demo and information. Excuse me. So appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate the what you were showing in the log analytics, because I was just in the log analytics this morning. I hadn't been in there for a while. And that was a very nice being able to sort and do all that stuff, because that's, I mean, it's the same thing I do. You look at the durations, you look at the CPUs, and you grab the event text to, the query, and then you can throw that into DAX Studio, like Jocelyn was showing, and you just go to town.
Yeah.
And I don't get anything out of query plans either. I gave up, the server type is all I need. I could figure it out from there, man.
Well, like I said, I know I come off like I'm a shareholder in SQL BI, but this new book, it is hefty. It is a big old hunk of book, but a lot of it is because there's so many screen captures of it, of the various different things, but I'm really enjoying this. I think it's starting to tie together a lot of stuff that I've gotten from various different pieces. It's not the easiest thing in the world to read. But maybe when you got a slow refresh and you hit refresh and you got a couple minutes, you can go
There you go.
check it
I've
out.
never
But
gotten through the definitive guide to DAX. I mean, I've started like 3 or 4 times.
Still on
and I get
chapter
a
5.
certain amount of the way through, and then they never quite finish it. But
yeah, it's IT ADD. That's what I call it. It's because you've got 2 monitors and 20,000 other things going on. It's like,
It's
or
true.
I'll go try that, and then I never get back to the book.
yeah. Hey, by the way, speaking of
I'm going to
new
go ahead and
books,
stop the recording now
Okay.
in case somebody wants to ask something off recording. So hold on.
there's a new Power Query book